Thomas. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Thomas? Who the heck is Thomas? Well, let me enlighten you. Thomas was an American president, the third one, in fact, serving from 1801 to 1809. Now, if that doesn't ring any bells, maybe his contributions to the Declaration of Independence will, or how about drafting the Louisiana Purchase or establishing the University of Virginia? Yeah, him. Not too shabby for a guy who some people still don't know existed. But today, we're not talking about all those accomplishments because, while impressive, they're all pretty well documented. Instead, we're taking a look at the lesser-known aspects of his life. And I have to warn you, this stuff is weird. We begin with his fashion sense. Jefferson was a man who took great pride in his appearance. He liked fine clothes and expensive shoes. He even had a tailor on staff. But there was one article of clothing he never parted with, his Brutus coat. He wore it everywhere, indoors and out, and only took it off when he was sleeping or bathing. That might sound a little gross, but hey, it was probably pretty warm since he chose to wear it year-round. The coat's history goes back to Roman times. It was named after the Roman dictator Marcus Junius Brutus, who was famous for delivering the fatal stab wound to Caesar. It was fashionable among Roman elites to wear togas made from the skins of their enemies. So when Brutus' coat was made from the spoils of the Battle of Corinthus, it was considered quite the status symbol. When Jefferson died, he left the coat to his friend and confidant, Philip Mazzei, with the understanding that it would one day be displayed in a museum. But museums weren't big on displaying coats back then, so Philip ended up wearing it until he died. After that, the coat passed to Philip's son, who kept it for a time before donating it to the University of Virginia. In 2016, it was appraised at $400,000, making it the most valuable artifact in the university's collection. Speaking of valuable artifacts, let's talk about his watch. Thomas Jefferson was given an incredible amount of gifts during his lifetime, including an 18-karat gold pocket watch from the city of New York in 1801. The watch was inscribed with the words, "To the Honorable Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, from the citizens of New York." Pretty standard gift inscription, right? Well, yes, except for the fact that the watch also contained a hidden message. The inscription went around the edge of the watch face, which itself was upside down. When the watch was closed, the inscription was unreadable, but when it was open, the words could be seen clearly. This was done intentionally so that no one could read the message unless they were actually holding the watch. It's not exactly clear what the big deal was. The watch was just a way of saying, "Thank you for your service," but perhaps the creators thought that it would make the gift more meaningful. Or maybe they just really liked pocket watches. Either way, the watch is now owned by the Thomas Jefferson Foundation and is on display at Monticello, Jefferson's home in Virginia. So far, we've talked about two of Thomas Jefferson's favorite things, his coat and his watch. But what about his food? Well, there's an interesting story behind one of his favorite dishes, a dessert called blancmange. It's a cold sweet dish made with milk, sugar, eggs, and flavorings such as vanilla or almond. It's been around since the Middle Ages and was popular in Europe until the 19th century. But it wasn't just popular in Europe. In fact, blancmange was one of the signature dishes of Thomas Jefferson's restaurant in Paris. That's right, before he was president, he was a chef. Well, not exactly. He didn't cook the food himself, but he did own a restaurant. In 1785, he partnered with two French businessmen to open a restaurant in Paris. They called it Le Trou Normand, or the Normandy House. The menu featured classic French dishes such as consommé, roast duck, and plum pudding. But the star of the show was blancmange. According to legend, it was so good that Marie Antoinette sent her own chef to learn the recipe. Whether or not that's true, we don't know. But what we do know is that Jefferson loved the dish so much that he brought the recipe back to the United States with him. He served it at state dinners, and it became one of the most popular desserts of the early Republic. In fact, it was so popular that there were entire cookbooks devoted to the subject. One of them, a collection of the most esteemed British and French recipes, was published in 1824 and included 11 different recipes for blancmange. Another thing Jefferson loved was wine. In fact, he was a bit of a connoisseur. He planted a vineyard at Monticello and imported French wines to the White House. But he wasn't just a drinker, he was also a collector. He amassed a cellar of over 1,500 bottles of wine, which was one of the largest largest collections in the United States at the time. Unfortunately, most of his collection was lost when his estate was sold after his death. But a few bottles did survive, and one of them recently sold at auction for over $30,000. That's right. In 2019, a bottle of Thomas Jefferson's personal wine collection sold for $30,150 at an auction in New York. It was a French Burgundy from the year 1787, which made it one of the oldest bottles of wine ever sold at auction. The previous owner had found the bottle in the basement of Monticello and had no idea it was worth so much money. Moving on to something a bit more macabre, there's the story of Thomas Jefferson's mole people. Now, I do mean that he was obsessed with moles or that he employed an underground network of mole enthusiasts. What I mean is that he discovered a group of people living in underground tunnels beneath his house. It happened in 1805 when workers were digging a cellar at Monticello. They came across a series of tunnels and chambers that had been carved into the bedrock. At first, they thought it was part of a former plantation, but as they explored further, they found signs that someone had been living there recently. They found furniture, tools, and even human excrement, but they never found any bodies. It was as if the mole people had vanished into thin air. To this day, no one knows who the mole people were or why they were living under Jefferson's house. Some believe they were slaves who tunneled out from the plantation next door. Others believe they were Native Americans who fled the settlers by carving out a subterranean homestead. But most historians agree that they were probably just a bunch of squatters trying to get out of the rain. Speaking of Native Americans, there's the story of Thomas Jefferson's pet indigenous people. No, wait, come back. I'm not talking about a zoo. What I'm talking about is a group of Native Americans whom Jefferson kept at Monticello as a kind of living exhibit. In 1785, he wrote to a friend, "I've got a party of 12 savages from my garden. They came in peace and are a harmless, idle, sober set, very well clothed, clean, and good-humored." Jefferson was fascinated by Native American culture, and he studied their language, customs, and history. He even corresponded with several Native American leaders, including the famous Chief Joseph. But he wasn't above exploiting them for his own amusement. One time he dressed up as a Native American and rode around Monticello on a horse with one of the natives on its back. He also forced them to participate in theatrical performances for his amusement, and he even chained them up like animals in a circus. Finally, let's talk about Thomas Jefferson's donkey. It wasn't just any donkey, it was a talking donkey. Well, sort of. In 1807, Jefferson was working in his study when he heard a knock at the door. He opened the door and there was a donkey with a piece of paper tied to its tail. The paper said, "Beware of the enemy." Then the donkey spoke. Well, it didn't actually speak. It made a noise that sounded like, "Beware of the enemy." Jefferson was so startled that he wrote about the incident in a letter to a friend. He said, "My first care upon opening my door was to look under the donkey to see whether there was not a little fellow peeping out at me with a hand to hold up the paper against its tail. But all my search could discover was a well-executed piece of mechanism." So was it a talking donkey or a clever hoax? We may never know the truth, but one thing is for sure. Thomas Jefferson's life was a lot weirder than you might think.